Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today I thought we would do another recap video looking into some things which were added to War Thunder in 2020. This time we're going to have a look at locations and also missions, basically because when you think about it, locations are much more important than individual vehicles. At the end of the day, you're going to play on a singular map way more in a year than you are going to play a specific vehicle, unless you really like that vehicle. The majority of the time you're going to see the location more. So in the context of the game, especially with the addition of the map filter or the map filtration system in 2019, it's really important to keep an eye on what maps are in, what maps are out, what maps are all over the place, and all of that good stuff. Since we've had a bunch of rotation of maps recently, if you want to actually know a little trick, I suppose, when it comes to the way that locations work, if you go to the map rotation filter, if the map itself isn't in the rotation filter right now, that means that it's not in rotation. So I believe a recent example is that American Desert wasn't in the rotation for the map rotation filter, therefore you shouldn't have seen it since it was removed. But the main thing when it comes to last year is it's definitely a story of ups and downs. For me, it was a story of downs for ground, ups for air, and naval, a little bit of both. So let's start off looking at the different updates and what they added when it came to these new locations. The first one was update Viking Fury. Obviously, the Swedish ground got added in this update, and alongside of it, a new ground location was also added, which of course was Sweden. Sweden being a city map based around some ideas from Sweden itself, not any specific city or anything like that, just the general landscape and also general buildings. Sweden is actually a map I do favor. It has two fundamental issues with it though, and the first one is when you're in an aircraft on the Swedish map, your frame rate is incredibly bad, or at least for me it is. The frame rate just doesn't hold up, meaning that generally I sit at 60 FPS when it comes to War Thunder, mainly because I play with VSync on, but on a map like Sweden, it drops to around about 20 when I fly over the city in the air. This is a big issue. One of the other things that also happens on Sweden is the fact that the sound is just all over the place. You can hear enemy engines or allied engines from what seems like miles away when it comes to the map, meaning that you can hear them through streets, and it can get very confusing where people are, and also it means that if you just sit still and wait for people to come, it's very easy to set up with them. There seems to be no muffling of the sound when it comes to the houses or when it comes to the streets around, so therefore it's easy to pick people off. The general idea of Sweden, though, the way that it's set up, I do like. Overall, you have street combats, which is always a little bit of fun, and also there are starting to get defined lines where people go, so therefore you can, work around it. One of the problems when it first came out, when people hadn't learnt the map yet, it was incredibly RNG how the maps would go, because all it needed was 1 or 2 or 3 people to go slightly different routes than everybody else, and they could end up in the enemy spawn incredibly quickly. And now, with more defined routes, you can set up for them. Now there's more map knowledge going around, you can sort them out, so overall it's not too bad. So if those major issues were fixed when it came to Sweden, I think it would actually be a very good map. One of the things, though, about Sweden is Sweden was the only new ground map which was added in 2020. The rest of the maps were modified older maps, and I'm wondering if that means going forward we're going to get older maps modified instead of newer maps. Obviously it takes way less time to be able to modify an old map instead of create a new one, but it's just kind of a surprise. I think this is in some words the worst year for the amount of new maps when it comes to ground forces since ground forces was released. Only getting one is very surprising. Then, in the same update of Viking Fury, the location Denmark was added. Now, Denmark is an arcade map. It works incredibly well for Air Arcade. You know, the one that I played on it, at least, was the Domination. And overall, there isn't too much you can screw up with an arcade map when it comes to how to set it up, you know, especially if it's a Domination map, because basically all you've got to do is just, you know, set up the 3 airfields and then also have the AIs either moving towards all of them or just moving towards the center one, and then, you know, you're done. So the location itself is really nice. It's beautiful to fly around, but at the same time, it's not groundbreaking. It's basically the same that we've seen before when it comes to arcade. And then also there was a test flight added to Sweden in the location of Denmark, giving it a little bit of its own flair. Then we had update Starfighters, which of course gave us the F-104s. By the way, if you want to see any of these updates, I'll make sure to leave them in the description for you, and therefore, you know, you can have a look at the different ones. And what update Starfighters brought was an interesting time. The first thing that obviously it brought was, as I said, the F-104, but another thing that it also brought was the idea that we would have a mini update inside a major update. So Regia Marina, which was technically a 6th update of the year, but a very minor one, which added a few vehicles and a few this and a few that, and many people thought would be, you know, the way that they were going to go in the future, where they were just going to add a lot of mini updates with, you know, a few vehicles here and there. That was also present during the time of update Starfighters, and that means that we have to treat them as individual things instead of the same thing going forward. Now, in Starfighters itself, there were 2 changes when it came to the update, and once again, as I said, they were reworking old maps. The Kursk map was completely changed. It has now got a new name. It is now a supposedly completely new map, and then the next one is, of course, Italy. Italy was also changed. Kursk was renamed to Fire Arc, and Italy was renamed to Campania. And when it comes to both of these maps, well, I suppose the Kursk one solved a problem which was seen by, you know, people as an issue, and the Campania one didn't, though. So let's start off with Fire Arc, the new version of Kursk. So Fire Arc has now made it that if you are from the southern spawn, it is impossible to be able to contest either the point to the left or the point to the right. You have to go to the central point, because if you go to the right, the enemy gets to that the right point ridge, which they can overlook the right point or the eastern point before you get there, so they can snipe you before you get there. This is at any tier. And then on the west hand side or the left hand side, you have to cross an open field to be able to get to the western point, and at the same time the enemy gets a hill that they get to sit on, and also 2 layers of cover in the form of the roads, where they can just sit behind, go hull down, and make sure you never ever get anywhere near that. So therefore, on Fire Arc, if you are the southern team, you have one opportunity, and that is to go to the city, and that is to first spawn and go to the city. Because if you die and second spawn going into the city, your route into the city is all it takes is 1 tank to be sat down the main road to take you out. So winning on the southern side of Fire Arc is one of the hardest experiences in the game, because of the fact that you cannot really create any pressure anywhere apart from in the center of the map, and if you don't create the pressure in the center of the map, then you're screwed. And if your team loses, you know, a decent amount first spawn and has to spawn back in, you will never get that pressure in the center that you need to push forward. Fire Arc is not a good redesign, in my opinion. One of the interesting things about it, one of the good parts of it, is there is ways of traveling between the zones and, being able to shield yourself from the enemy coming in. But in order to get to the zones from your spawns, especially from the southern side, is really, really hard to do because of the terrain difference, because of the altitude difference, because of the spawns, and also because of just where certain hills are set up. I don't think they reworked anything, and if this is based on players' feedback, we need to stop listening to the players and let the people who create maps for a job do what they do best. Campania, I think, was actually a good rework, but it didn't solve the major issues of the map. So, Campania is a really cool looking map now. They made it look like an actual battle had been fought in it. They added a bunch of corpses to it in the form of tanks. They added a bunch of derelict buildings and destroyed buildings. They added a bunch of new archways. They added a bunch of, stuff which was really nice. They also removed a ton of the fences, which at least for me was a big plus. Because the problem with Italy, when it was a map, it generally had a lot of problems if you were using a vehicle which only had access to either heat or HESH, or even HE, and also at the same time it was kind of hard to spot people. People would appear and disappear because of all of the fences, and it just made it a complete mess when, you were looking around the place. So the fact that they removed all that stuff in the favor of lower edged walls, this to me was a big plus. They also added a bunch of, I suppose, bushes and things to the southern area, so it was more to try and push people, to fight each other. I thought that was a good change. The fact that you have the slaloms of dead tanks at the bottom, and also the slalom of bushes and, trees and things like that. It just meant that the combat was more close orientated, and I thought that makes it really, really nice to, fight in the south. In the north, they added more ways of being able to get to the other side. So, just more paths, more arches. So there's more ways of, counterplay to the enemy and what they're doing. This is obviously positive, and B didn't really change apart from the defense changes. Now, Campania's problem, and this will be a problem for a long time when you have a map which is set up like it. So you have a city zone or a town zone or, a house zone or something like that. And then the two sides of the city area are open. The problem you're going to have is whoever wins that initial battle, whoever smashes the enemy forward and, takes that first initial hit and wins it, gets in such a good position as a team. It is incredibly hard to crack unless they've left a gap in the defense. So what would happen a lot of the times, and still happens today, when it comes to, the Campania map, this is what would happen on Italy. The initial hit would happen, one team would win the initial hit, and they would snowball hard by capturing the zones, moving out to the outer rocks of the city, and then pinning the enemy in their spawn. And you can still do this today on Campania. You could do it before on Italy, and it was the major issue of the map, and it still hasn't been fixed. The problem, the way to fix it would be an altitude change on the spawns, so you can't shoot into them. Instead, you'd have to shoot over them, and then just more cover going from the spawns to the city itself or to the town itself, and that would help it quite a lot. But at least for me, in this update, the fire arc changes were more negative to the map of Kursk, if I'm honest with you. And then Italy itself, changing to Campania, it actually was a positive change, but it didn't fix the fundamental issue, and that was a problem. Regia Marina added a bunch of changes to missions and locations, but once again, no new maps. So it added the fact that during confrontation, the front line now reflects the shape of sectors. That's pretty cool. At the end of the day, more actual definition on where your troops are fighting. Then they changed a bunch of naval enduring confrontation stuff. Obviously, there's been a big push for that over this year. We'll have to see, or last year, sorry. We'll have to see if that manifests itself in anything this year. It'd be nice to see more naval EC, just to, give it a go, see what goes on with it. I'm definitely looking forward to it. And then also, they changed a bunch of roads when it came to Ladoga, Kuban, Herk, and Stalingrad, Mozdok, Moscow. And this just meant that everything, made much more sense instead of things getting stuck where they shouldn't be. And then also, they changed a bunch of visual bugs when it came to, all of the, a lot of the ground maps. So overall, basic just bug fixes and also changes to enduring confrontation. Isn't a bad thing, it is good. Then you have update Raining Fire, obviously. Raining Fire coming in, nearer the end of the year. And this is where stuff started ramping up when it came to air realistic. Now, they'd already kind of been ramping up at the start of the year. Update Viking Fury did add in a change to aircraft models. So therefore, this basically meant that depending on what BR you were playing, depending on what rank you were playing, your airfield would change. So the higher the rank, the higher the BR match, the longer the runway. So this was an incredibly positive change. And then also, they added a bunch of AI changes. So, you actually had to take out AI instead of it just disappearing after a while in Air Realistic. This was a big change to how Air Realistic went because it paved the way for changes which came after, when you now had way more control on how an Air Realistic match could go, because you were the one who would take out the AI, and they were actually part of, the ticket count and all of this good stuff. So overall, that started when it came to update Viking Fury. And then in Raining Fire and also New Power, they really pushed this through as well. So the first thing that happened in Raining Fire is there was a new location for naval missions, Aleutian Islands. I've only seen this once while playing naval. I don't know if it's predominantly a realistic map or not, but in arcade, I've literally only seen it once, and I don't know whether people have it banned. I don't know what's going on with it, but at least my experiences on it in custom battles have been positive. It looks like a much larger scale map. It looks really beautiful. I would like to play on it more, but it's been out for a few months now, and as I said, I've only seen it once, so there's not a lot I could do about it. Then they added Winter Mozdok to an aircraft location. This is a positive thing. I really like the idea of adding multiple variants of the same map, but in different weather conditions, especially in Air Realistic, because it does change the game in Air Realistic. There are certain, because of the way that Air Realistic works, depending on what map that you're on, every map has obviously kind of defined weather conditions, which do affect your engine performance. It does mean that your engine and your aircraft does get affected by the weather conditions that are around. This is why if you play on certain maps, your engine will overheat way more or quicker, I should say, than other maps. And also, there are many different maps which are at slightly different altitudes to each other. So therefore, they affect how all that works. If you want examples of this, you have stuff such as Malta, or you have stuff such as, I can't remember its name. Well, you've got Hokkaido, but if you compare them to something like Ruhr, or, something like the Italian map, Sicily, there we go. So Sicily is one where your engine will overheat pretty quickly if you're not careful. And then somewhere like Ruhr, where it's much more winter conditions and much cooler than, just off Italy, it's actually going to take your engine a lot longer to be able to burn up. And this, I thought, is really cool, and it's something that's been in War Thunder for a long time. And if you want an altitude, example, Afghanistan. actually the airfields are way higher than other maps, so that means you start off at a higher altitude, therefore you have less performance with the vehicle when you get up to altitude, and this is why sometimes jet combat can feel a bit sluggish on Afghanistan, but that is showing how just even being on the map does really affect the performance of your vehicle, and the fact that you're getting different variants of the same map with different weather conditions, this is great. I really like this. Then we had some more historical aircraft missions. They added a bunch of Moscow historical aircraft missions, which were really cool as well, and also they just did a bunch of fixes to it as well. Then they also started changing a bunch of the missions in Air Realistic, and these were all positive changes. So they took Lagoda or Ladoga, Khalkhin-Gol, Korsun, Krimsk, Kursk, Mozdok, and Normandy, and the base models for bombing have been changed to the correct ones. Their functionality is now similar to Enduring Confrontation mode. After destruction, bases may respawn randomly in certain positions designed for every mission. Then the next part, airfields have been removed from the target list, but they cannot be destroyed now. And then airfield models and their location towards the center of locations have been standardized. In low-tier battles, it's 12, mid-tier 20, high-tier 26, and then all tiers had airfields located 20 kilometers away from their location center. That's basically how they worked. The size of an airfield now depends on the battle's rank, and mid-tier missions now have stage airfields located 12 kilometers from the location area. So this was the first huge change in Air Realistic, and I think this change is one of the best ones that they've made in Air Realistic in years. As I said before, adding new vehicles just gives you a new toy to fly around. Adding new locations or revamping locations is so much better, because you're going to see those locations so much more. And the way that they actually changed these maps, basically they took away the 3-lane system. So a lot of maps when it comes to War Thunder are set up in 3 lanes. On one side you normally have a tank column with some armored cars and AA, the other side you have pillboxes, and these tank columns wander into the pillboxes and they kill each other, and it's up to you to try and change the battle in one way or the other, so therefore you win the engagement. That's basically how it works, right? Now, what happens now is, on these new style of maps, you have a central area where a battle is going on constantly. 2 sides are fighting each other, but it is up to the player to destroy the ground targets. They don't just willy-nilly annihilate each other. Instead, it is up to you to have an impact on the game instead of just letting the AI win the game for you. One of the problems with maps like Hokkaido is if you just leave it and, let it go, at least it used to, I'm not sure about nowadays, but if you just let it happen, the northern side would just win the match. They would just win. Because the tanks would push through, they'd capture the zones, you would lose by tickets. Simple as that. So, as the southern side, you had the impetus to try and stop that, so therefore you had to focus on the enemy air, and you also had to focus on the enemy ground, and there was nothing you could do about that. You just got screwed by what side you were able to spawn on. And now with these new systems, where they've set up these standardized maps where it just shows 2 assault lines attacking each other, you as an individual now have a direct impact on how this can work, how this all works. They also made it so there's a lot more lighter units that, aircraft can annihilate. They made it so there's more artillery, there's more howitzers, there's more AA, there's more armored cars, and all of them count towards the ticket counter. So even if you don't have, or even if you're using something that isn't a high-tier attacker or a heavy bomber or a air superiority fighter, you actually have a direct impact on the game when you didn't before. you didn't. You just weren't able to do anything on the scale of those other machines. So with these changes to maps, it now meant that there are so many more machines which are actually useful in the game, which weren't before. And this just, to me, is a wonderful thing. And I'm very happy that they made all of these changes because of that fact. And this is what I mean about the up and the down nature. So far this year that we've looked into, we're on the third update, or the fourth update out of 6, or the third update out of 5, there hasn't been great changes to ground, apart from the addition of Sweden, where in air, there has actually been fundamental changes for air maps which have made them incredibly fun to play and meant that any vehicle is viable in some way or another. And that, to me, is awesome. Then, of course, we had Update New Power. Update New Power being the new, shiny update at the end of the day. And this added a ton of new stuff. Obviously, it added the carriers, for the US, the British, and the USSR. This added at least something to the test flights, and also it meant that the carriers on certain maps were revamped, which is really nice to see. And then at the same time, they changed Honolulu, they changed Saipan, they changed Peleliu as well, basically to change them into navally sea maps, so we'll see what goes on with them. And then all of the aircraft AB missions were also reworked in the way that the realistic ones were reworked too. So therefore, it was all based, or it's mainly based around being able to take out, the ground units, and then also the bases, and not so much about just annihilating the airfield, and meaning that heavy bombers have less of a role to play when it comes to this. Medium and light bombers can actually do something. So therefore, overall, I thought, once again, a very good change. They also added rice terraces to the RB rotation. Not sure about that one, gonna be honest with you. Rice Terraces is an incredibly small map. It is an arcade map, and let's just say when I was playing jets like the SK-60, getting an air spawn on Rice Terraces and getting over to the enemy airfield before people actually took off, that was a bit of a problem, not gonna lie. That was a real problem, and I really don't agree with that map, at least in mid to high tier aerialistic, so hopefully that gets changed at some point. Then, as I said, like all of the changes to the arcade maps that happen in this update were incredibly positive and really, really nice to see. They fundamentally changed how a lot of the AI vehicles work, the aircraft models as well, and also, basically they made it, once again, they got rid of the AI units just getting annihilated by nothing, by like invisibleness. They wouldn't just pop, they wouldn't just destroy, so therefore they could just go wherever they wanted, and it's up to the player to be able to, the onus is on the player to win the battle. The onus is not on the player just to sit there and wait for the battle to be won for them, and this is just, it just means you have more control. I don't know how else to put it. It just means that you yourself have way more control on the battlefield, and this is obviously incredibly positive. And then in Hot Tracks, unfortunately, there wasn't really a lot added, apart from the festive hangar was enabled, so that was a bit of a problem. There is one map that actually isn't mentioned in any of these, which did sneak in, I believe, in Update New Power, because it also, in Hot Tracks, was started to be used as a helicopter EC mission, the city mission, and I think this is awesome for helicopter EC, but it's also pretty awesome for aerialistic. The city map, and also Operation City was added in Update New Power. And this is the first map where we have stuff such as skyscrapers on it, apart from, I suppose, Alaska, but on a large scale, where you can fight inside the city map, and it's really cool. You know, it's really fun to play. The only problem I have with city map right now is if you want to, you can end it in 5 minutes by destroying a lot of the AIs. They clump up very easily. It's very easy to destroy lanes of the AIs which are coming in to fight in the center of the city, so that needs to be reworked a little bit. But the map itself and the ideas of it, and the fact that it runs really well as well, is awesome. So I'm glad that, you know, we have like a map where you can dodge, dip, and dive through skyscrapers. It's really cool and really fun. It's also a map which can fit pretty much any game mode that it wants. It just needs that AI tweaking a little bit. Otherwise, you know, it's not going to go in too many places. So, as you can see, when it comes to the three major game modes, you know, air, ground, and naval, the naval stuff, not a ton of stuff went on, but then again, in the last few years, you know, naval has got a million maps, and, you know, the EC was worked on quite a lot in 2020, which was really nice. In ground, they did a few reworks, not many of them worked. You know, they changed a few rocks here and there on certain maps. One of the things they did do, actually, which I think I missed out, so one of the things I did do, I can't remember which one it was in. Oh, it was in Update Starfighters. So basically, in Update Starfighters, they removed a bunch of the camping positions on Ashra, the Carpathians, and Korea. Basically, the ones where you could go outside the map and be able to camp. That to me was a big change. And then also what they did was they changed the height of the rocks on the cliff on the western side of Poland. A huge change which did absolutely nothing, because, you know, they changed the wrong rocks. But also in Update Starfighters, they changed a bunch of the aerialistic maps. This was probably the big one where they massively changed a lot of the central maps of aerialistic, you know, to that new format instead of the three lines, the big fight in the middle. And I think it was such a positive change. Like, as a person who's played aerialistic for like 7 years, this year has really rejuvenated my hope and my love for aerialistic. And the fact is, it's because of the map designs. I think the new maps are just way better than the old style maps. I think they work a lot better than the old style maps. And I really, really hope that this is a sign going forward on how everything is going to work. And yeah, it's really, really nice how they've all set it up. Hopefully in 2021 we get more expansions of how airfields are going to work, and also more expansions of the style of maps that they implemented in Update Starfighters and Update Raining Fire, and hopefully as well we get some new maps, especially for ground, since they only had one last year. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank John Ryman, Universe, Conte Baraka, E-Love Goat, Trigger Hippie, Eugens Terry, Ambrosius McClellan, Daniel Stanton, Martinez B. Young, and also Hans Vergellen, Sebastian Mizon, and Samuel Schlick for supporting the channel.